Welcome to the Fane of Fantasy. This channel is all about giving you inspiration to master your craft and create fantasy that will truly immerse your audience. So today I have one of my favorite videos again. So this is once again about the world building, which I really like, and I'm also blessed to have Robert here to help me. So maybe you want to say a few words about yourself, Robert.
Yes, my name is Robert Bishop. I am soon to be 32 years old. Oh my God. Um, and I'm writing on a fantasy series called The Fall of Numan, as well as a science fiction series, as well as a story for a video game coming out in 2 years.
Nice.
So a lot of stuff to do.
Yes, exactly. And as we were emailing about, this is also why I think Robert will serve as an excellent guest for all of us here today in terms of talking a bit about world building, because he has a very vast experience in the world building stuff. And we were trying to kind of hone in on what we should cover today. And I think what we settled was to talk a bit about something that not directly but indirectly I've almost touched upon before, because when I talked about world building diseases and all stuff, that sort of stuff, which we love. So this was a bit about what do we actually have to build to get started, and what can we save for later. Did I get that right, Robert?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Right.
Yeah, so for me, I think my like first go-to point is to just start slow, or just start period. Because for me, I tend to get bogged down by like the minute details of the world. So maybe it's just me, but if I start designing a map, for instance, then I'll never be satisfied. Then I need to have like the entire world completely planned out.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'll just say make sure you know where your protagonist lives and what goes on in that general area, and if you know a few kingdoms and cities, that should be enough. And also maybe some of the major events, like in Game of Thrones, you have Robert's Rebellion, you have the Wall, and then just don't sweat the smaller stuff. You don't need
Mm.
to have every outpost in there or every gold mine. It's too much.
Right. So when you're doing this, are you separating the world building notes for yourself away from the map? Or are you meaning in both cases? Because I'm thinking for the map, you do need to know, and you don't need to know all the villages and stuff, but you need to know the big stuff on the map. Otherwise, you can't make the map.
Yeah.
But are you saying that for you it's enough to just focus maybe on the city where the protagonist begins, and then you're kind of good to go, or how do you kind of bridge that with the map, I guess what I'm asking.
Yeah, actually, maybe I'm a bit hypocritical here because I've done both. But because the Newman, my first world, I created that before I started writing. Uh,
Hmm.
so I just created that to like create a world and use that for like role playing. But now, after I've actually started writing seriously, I kind of, yeah, I designed the map while I'm writing the story.
Okay.
So yeah, I'd like to have like know where the what the landmass looks like, but I just make both things simultaneously.
Okay.
Yeah, so I
So
know. Yeah,
yeah, so are you then basically just making the starting point for the character, and then you build out from there?
yeah,
Okay. So when doing the starting point, how far do you go with that, and what should we be thinking about in that?
yeah. Well, of course, you start. I start with the city where the protagonist lives, or if he lives in the forest, then I start with that. And usually, the world grows a lot bigger, like for me in the first paragraphs, because you start thinking, okay, what is the general area, what does this person know about the area surrounding him, and then immediately you get like the neighboring cities, maybe you get some kind of mystical island to the east where stuff is happening. um, so it grows pretty fast.
Mm.
But doing it like this, for me at least, gives me the options to keep things open. So I always picture it like in those old strategy games where you have this fog of war that kind of lifts as you
Yeah.
move your units. Yeah,
Mhm.
so kind of like that.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
But I think you said just before that you've done both. So
yeah,
why is it that you prefer this approach that you just mentioned over the, let's say, more elaborate world building before you begin
yeah.
writing?
Because I found that the first approach, building the entire world first, it kind of hurt my writing because I got really, really bogged down with the exposition. And there were kind of settlements and mystical areas that I didn't want to remove them, even though they had nothing to do with the plot. So instead, it was like, okay, so they're going to go to that city, but on the way there, they're passing this city and they're passing an outpost, and that outpost was in a war 10 years ago, and it's got nothing to do with the plot. So yeah, so I chopped out the two first chapters of my novel, and it didn't hurt the story at all because it was
Right,
just exposition.
right, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I ended up. I also had on the initial map of my world. I had a whole region which was kind of a big. Well, actually, I had two. I had one that was a huge like desert area, and then I had another one on the other end of the world, which was like this. Well, it was more than an island. It was almost like a continent or something. And
yeah,
both those I actually just removed completely. Took them off the map. Gone they
yeah,
were, because as you just said there, I had the same thing going on where I actually had a lot of cultural stuff about those places, and I knew what was going on, and but it had no, let's say, point within the story at all. So it's just take it out.
yeah, yeah. It just pads out the novel, so it's yeah.
Yeah. So how do we know what a world needs? I mean, of course, we talked about, so we need to understand a city, but understanding a city from the starting point is also that can mean a lot of things. In terms of your fog of war, there, I mean that even that goes, what happens beyond the city and what is in the area as such. But what about within the city walls? When you're building that city, how far do you go, and what do you focus on that?
Yeah. Well, as with the rest, I kind of did both there as well.
Hmm.
I tried making a map of my city, and it was just impossible for me. Um, so I've just kind of built what I feel the story needs. So with the first Fall of Numan book, then you have like the neighborhood where the protagonist lives, which is kind of rural, and then I found that the whole city was kind of rural compared to the capital of the world, which is far more technologically advanced. So then I needed to like place that on the map as well. But suddenly I had a second arc that takes place in an industrial area, so I added that. And then the industry needed to make something for the rest of the city, so I kind of added that too. That's when I decided to set it all like in a industrial revolution type setting, slightly more steampunk. So yeah, I just kind of build the world around what the protagonist needs or sees.
Hmm.
So yeah.
So have you come up with any good kind of rule of thumb about how do you know when you're going too far? How do you tell yourself, oh, now I'm getting into building this stuff that I don't really need? What's the trigger for you that tells yourself that, oh, I need to wheel back now?
Um, I think always when I start a new paragraph, uh, because when you have the protagonist like gazing out at their city, and then you just go, you press enter twice, and then you start writing about the city, and I can go on for page after page after page. So yeah, I think when I do that, the second I hit enter twice, I just dial it back and think, is this really necessary? Could I somehow pad this out? Could I put the exposition into a dialogue instead, for instance?
Mhm.
So yeah.
So I was just thinking, because you mentioned You mentioned the video game as well. You also mentioned role playing before. So is there a difference on how you go about it for those things compared to writing? Do you do that differently, or is it the same approach?
No, it's kind of different. Yeah, writing. I found that writing for the video game is much harder
Okay.
because you don't have. It's not linear in the same way because for our game, it's a strategy game, and you need to have. You can choose what mission you start on. So the story needs to like make sense for all of those, no matter where you start. And you can
Right.
start several places in the world, and there are these four dwarven clans that have been scattered since the destruction of their home. So I needed to know where they were when at the start of the game. So in that instance, I was not forced to, but I had to create much of the world beforehand. But I did the same thing. I just not very creative, I guess, but there were four clans and there are four cardinal directions on the compass. So I just spread them. And of course, there is ice in the north and there is desert in the south. And then as I started writing their stories, the world grew from there.
Okay. So what things did you end up adding when you started writing that story?
Well, for the clans living in the desert, I found that that kingdom had been founded by three great houses. So I needed to add. There was one city for each of the great houses, so I added those. And then I needed a reason for them settling in the desert like that.
Hmm.
So I found that they were mining a valuable resource. So I added some mining pits and stuff like that. And then I needed conflict. So there's this band of reavers, pirates that are currently coming to take the kingdom. And so I added them, and then I needed a place where they came from. So yeah, it just blew up from there.
Yeah, and then you have a good point there because from a world building perspective, once you start adding things, if at least if you do add something like you said, somebody's living in the middle of the desert, uh, you do need to think about why are they there. I mean, why would you settle in the middle of a desert? You need to have at least a convincing experience or explanation to why that is, because
Yeah,
yeah, otherwise it just wouldn't happen, right? And not
yeah.
because we as world builders just think that would be cool, that's not a good enough reason.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of both ways, but I think also the reader is sometimes we don't give them enough credit. I think because a lot of the things that goes unsaid in the novel or book or whatever is something the reader just figures out on their own.
Hmm.
So if you have gold currency, they know there are gold mines there. You don't have to explain that, I think.
No, yeah, yeah. This particular coin came from that one gold mine over there, and it gets very
Yeah,
boring very fast, right?
yeah. So yeah, I've done that before. So
Yeah. Yeah, true. So it's this in terms of the world building part. So the video games and the role playing, is that very similar then, and then it's just the world building for the novel part that is very different.
yeah, for me, it's like that. So,
Okay.
like I said earlier, I understand the hypocrisy of what I'm saying here because I'm like, don't build the world at first, and then I've done that several times. But for me now, when I'm writing, it's just it helps me to just do the writing part and then figure the world out as I
Mm,
go along.
mm.
Yeah.
Do you find your writing going slower as a consequence because you have to stop and build something in between, or?
Yeah, maybe the writing goes a little slower, but it's also like a lot funnier because suddenly when I realize something about the world, then I get really excited and get to build the world at the same time.
Mm. Yeah, of course I
So
can see that. Yeah.
yeah, and I also found like having a complete map made my writing slower as well because I needed to cross-reference everything and always check the map to see, oh, where are we now? What's around here?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, yeah, I can see that. It kind of works both ways, I would say, because on the other hand, it can also help you to if you created a good map, at least it can also help you once the characters travel from point A to point B. It can help you by telling well, you can look at the map and then you'll know what kind of terrain are they going to come across, or maybe there is, like you said before, a particular dangerous outpost or something. But
Yeah,
it can also help you. I guess it kind of depends on how you look at it, I guess.
yeah. Yes, I think both ways are good actually. Just yeah, this is what works for me. And there was specifically one part in the first book, which was they were there was this huge lake that I had drawn into the map, and it had nothing to
Hmm.
do with the story. And I spent hours figuring out how they were gonna cross that lake until I realized that I can just remove it. It doesn't have to be there.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah,
Um, so I'm thinking now that you both have. I mean, I've had other guests where they have, for example, had video game experience, and then other guests again who had role playing and writing experience. But as far as I recall, I cannot remember other guests where they have done all three of them.
no.
So I was thinking if you could, if there is is there any kind of rule of thumb or something that you could talk to about if somebody thinks that what we're talking about here, as in I'll try only to build as much as I need and then from there on build as I go. Is there any kind of rule of thumb that you could maybe summarize for people so that this is, if you operate it like this, then that is a good way that will ensure that you're not overbuilding or getting into world building disease and those sort of things?
Yeah. Well, in one sentence, think I would say that less is more. Um, because I mean, it's hard to write fantasy because the world doesn't immediately make sense because nothing is there, just there from like the get-go. Um, but not everything needs to be explained either. The reader won't question why they're speaking English, for instance. So I think that's kind of the focus on the plot, focus on the story, focus on the characters, and then have the world as a supporting character in the
Mm,
background.
mm.
I think
Yeah,
that's yeah.
yeah, and I actually I'm curious what you think about this, but my Autumn, my business partner, and I are getting prepared, or we're doing some research because we're going to do a world building course later this year.
Yeah,
And one of the things that we have found out already from our research is that if you're looking at all like the most best-selling fantasy books out there, the one thing that they almost all of them have in common is that all the positive reviews are talking about the characters. They do
yeah,
not talk about world building or setting. They talk about characters.
yeah,
That's what people love. And you just mentioned character there as well, which kind of I think most of the time when we think about world building, we don't think about characters, and by default it's not really about character. I mean, character creation is something different than world building, but it's, what I'm trying to say is more that one thing cannot work without the other.
yeah. That's true. So, and
uh,
I think every character in the world will also have like they will have this part with them from where they came. Uh, like if this is very basic, but if they come from icy wastes, then they're hardy people. If they
right.
come from the desert, then they're not used to the cold, and also a lot of other things, of course. But we all carry like a fragment with us from where we came, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Sorry, I needed to cough there.
yeah.
um, So the world that you created for your books versus the one you have for the game and for the role playing stuff, is that three different worlds or is it the same stuff?
No, for the role-playing stuff, that was like 10 years before I started writing. So that's the basis of the world of Numan, the one I have for my books. And then the world for the game is another world, and then I have a third science fiction universe. that that has no map or anything. It's just planets yet.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
So it's kind of easier, I think. Well, not easier. Nothing is easy, but with science fiction, you have, because there you can use, if a world doesn't work, you can just add another planet and have them go there instead.
Hmm. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
Um, but how do you keep track of when you only? I'm thinking when you're only building what you need when you need it. So how do you make sure that you're not incorporating inconsistencies, meaning that something you wrote or said, uh, I don't know what, 20 chapters ago, or like in a different sequence of the video game or whatever it is? How do you
Yeah.
make sure that the new stuff that you're now adding on top doesn't conflict with what you said over there?
Yeah. No, I do write everything down. So I have like this world building, both document, and I have a map that I just add things to as they come into the world. So I keep a detailed track of things. So every time I'm building lore, I write it down on a separate document to remember.
Okay, because I think if if some of those watching out there would like to see if they can wheel back on their own world building and maybe only start building what they need, I think one of the important things that we would need to understand is, I mean, writing it down, I understand that, but you'll need some kind of easy system to basically find what you need and how and understand how it interlocks with whatever new thing you're adding on top. So do you just have it in a Word document and you scroll through, or do you have some kind of tagging, or do you use a system for it, or how do you do that?
Yeah. No, I have several million Word documents, but yeah, I also have a map that I use. So, but not anything more than that. No. I used to be able to rely very much on my memory, not so much anymore. So I think I need to. I actually think I need to incorporate a system myself as these books keep growing.
Right. Yeah. I actually even think, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's some software out there that you can access via web browsers. I think you probably need to pay a bit for them a month, but I think there is some software where you basically can document your whole thing, and you can
Yeah,
make one page link to another, and some Obsidian Portal. Is that right? Is there something called that?
yeah, might be. It sounds familiar. Yeah,
But I think you can, and actually that might actually be for free. If I'm not sure. I'm not sure,
no,
but I think there is software versions out of software available out there that you can use to keep track of all your documents and documentation of the world and so forth. If 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 you ever get tired of your million word documents,
yeah, I'm starting to. So yeah, that might be a good idea. So
yeah.
it's yeah. So far, I haven't needed to go back very far because I'm on only 2 books in. So, but yeah, as the world gets larger, that's definitely going to be something I need to look into.
Mm, mm. And how about the video when you document for video games? Because I guess there's more people who need to access and use the same information. Is
Yeah,
that a different way that you need to document that then?
yeah. I started with my own system there as well, but nobody could find anything. So, but we have like this Bible, this game design document that is absolutely huge. And the others added kind of like headlines for me to fill stuff into. So you have kind of descriptions, and those descriptions, they can't be like when you write lore, you try to use these big words and you have a sprawling metropolis and stuff like that. But they need to know like what's the color of the brick.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
because someone is going to draw that and design that, so you need to be specific. So yeah, it's a whole other way to work.
Yeah, it's that's pretty exciting. How did you get into doing world building for video games?
It was kind of a fluke. Someone I know, again, knew someone that was creating this video game right here in Trondheim, Norway, and they contacted me actually because she gave them my card. And they said, "Hi, how would you like to try your hands on writing a story for a game?" And I was like, "Ah, that sounds absolutely magnificent."
Yes,
So
I think I would.
yeah, so we had a couple of meetings, and I just we spitballed some ideas, and I did what I say here don't do, but I drew a map, and I just came up with some rough ideas for the world, and they liked it. So the rest is history.
Right. Yeah. 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 Because when we're talking about readers, as you said before, but also when you're talking about like co-producers or a production team on a video game, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, of course, the information that they need is different in the sense that the reader is supposed to be entertained by it, whereas the production team is supposed to understand, as you said, how to design something.
Yeah,
But at the end of the day, it's still about relying or relaying world building information and details as clear and precise as we can, right?
yeah, that's true.
And I guess that is very much the trick to learn how to achieve. Also, so that you don't have like. It's. I have to admit that it's been a very, very many years since I read Lord of the Rings last, but I have a faint recollection that I think like the first pages in that book is just on a exposition upon exposition in a long. It just keeps on and on and on, and it's just world
Yeah,
building. There's nothing happening
no,
as far as
that's
I
true.
remember. I could be wrong, and somebody will probably tell me in the comment section that I'm completely wrong, which is fine if I am, but that's how I remember it at least.
Yeah, but I think that's because it came out really early as well. So I think uh, on that in that time you really needed the exposition because this was something new. But now it's everything's been done to death. So if you kind of have too much exposition early in your book, you will lose the readers.
Yes, I agree, and I also think it's about the audience has changed. I mean, our way of consuming entertainment has shifted from back then. You
Yeah,
know, when Tolkien was writing his books, there was no Netflix or HBO that has kind of influenced our way of receiving entertainment for years upon years upon years, and that sits in us today. So when you open a new Netflix series, you want to be entertained. You're not going to sit there and look at world building stuff for half an hour before they
yeah,
get to the story. Uh, and I think that is a very big part of why fantasy novels today. Maybe we're in a bit of a transition period where we, as fantasy creators, are trying to learn this stuff ourselves as well.
yeah. That might be true. Yeah,
Because all the stuff we're looking on backwards is Tolkien and all that stuff, which is a completely different way of doing it.
yeah,
But yeah, but I guess that's kind of the same challenges that you are facing with video games and so forth as well, or even role playing. I mean, you also need to get people into the meat of things, right?
yeah, yeah. I think kind of across all platforms now, originality is really hard, and also getting people interested because yeah, there's such a vast pool of things to choose from. So there's no real reason they should choose my book or your book. So yeah, you need to catch them.
Mm. But how do we have any good advice on how to do that?
Oh, if I knew that, I would be a millionaire, I think. No, I don't. Yeah, I think it comes back to characters again. If you have memorable characters, then a lot of the work is done. An interesting plot and memorable characters, and of course, if they can interact with the world in a meaningful way. Uh, yeah, but I think like 80% luck because there is so much to choose from.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like you said characters because that was what I was thinking as well. That you need to ground the stuff in the character and in the character's actions and interactions with other characters. That's where you ground it. And then if you can kind of seed in some world building stuff in there, but
Yeah,
it comes as a natural consequence of what is happening,
yeah,
I think then you're on the right track.
yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think Brandon Sanderson is one of the best at doing that because his worlds are so vast and filled with so many fantastical elements, and still he makes it all work. So that's one of the few books I read where I just want more world building or more exposition.
Right.
Yeah. I don't understand how this works.
Yeah. He actually, I don't know if you've seen that, but I don't know if he does it every year, but he's done it several years in a row where he's been teaching on a university in the US. He's teaching a writing class, but everything is recorded on YouTube,
Yeah.
and you can watch every single of his classes. If you or if you have seen it, then but if somebody watching hasn't seen it, you can search on. I think it's called "Write About Dragons." I think that's what.
Yeah, I
If
think
you
so.
search about "Write About Dragons" on YouTube, you'll find it. I, I think it's some Columbia University or something like that. But they're all there. There's tons of videos where basically Brandon is well teaching his class, but on camera, about how to do world building and how to do introductions of characters and all that good stuff. So there's, if you haven't watched that, then I would say for people, go watch that, because there's a ton of good stuff there
Yeah. What are
to
you
learn from.
listening to me for? Go listen to Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, Robert, is there any kind of last good points we need to get across to those watching, about how do they find out what are the necessities for their story to work, i.e., what do they have to build and what can they save for later?
Mm. I would say don't over-explain. That's the most important thing. But as to wait with everything, wait until you need it. Wait until you start actually writing about it because someone mentions it. Don't mention the 7 cities on the continent. Mention them when the protagonist talks about them, or when he thinks about them, or when someone from those cities come along.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I guess then what you would say next would be, and then build the 7 cities once the characters mention them and not before, I guess.
Yeah, something like that. Or you could build them before as well, but just you don't have to put them in the book.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Robert, for coming on here and talk to us about world building, and maybe you're kind of a bit of a world building disease doctor here, because you're
Yeah.
kind of talking us away from world building disease. So that, I guess it
Yeah.
was about time I got somebody to talk about.
Stop building worlds.
Yeah. So where can people find out more about you, Robert, if they want to learn more?
Yeah, my page, robertbishop.net, has everything you need, I think. And I'm also on Facebook as Robert Bishop or /Fall of Numan, which is my series.
Very cool. And I will get Robert to email me the links, so I'll put it in the description field below, so they're right there when you watch this when you watch this video. So once again, thank you for joining today, Robert. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And to the rest of you, thank you for watching, and see you next Monday.